So you've been playing Jesus on The Chosen for 5 seasons now. What sort of conversations did you and Dallas have initially about the kind of Jesus that you wanted to show? Because your Jesus it's a very different portrayal.
Path to that is absolute and uncompromising surrendering to a higher power, things that are beyond my control.
There are interviews, and then there are moments that shake the room. Moments that leave even the most hardened skeptics scrambling for words. Jonathan Roumie's conversation with this interviewer was one such.
Jim Caviezel's Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, or Willem Dafoe's in The Last Temptation of Christ, or you know what else is a good one, but also very different than yours is Max von Sydow.
Oh, yeah.
The greatest story ever told.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those Jesuses or Jesi, I don't know what they're.
Jonathan Roumie has become one of the most recognizable faces in faith-based entertainment. But what many don't realize is just how deeply his role as Jesus in The Chosen has shaped him. Not just as an actor, but as a believer. He isn't just playing a character. He's stepping into something much greater, something that Hollywood doesn't understand and outright rejects.
And I'm not going to worry about it. And I was relieved because I really felt now it wasn't my choice. And then 3 months later, The Chosen comes along. And I thought, okay, I just needed to submit.
I know that you're a practicing Catholic.
Yeah.
What does your faith allow you to give to the role that a non-believer or a non-Catholic might not be able to give?
I feel that it lends an authenticity to the role that allows me to understand more of why Jesus did the things he did and said the things he did.
But that was just the beginning.
You've been playing Jesus on The Chosen for 5 seasons now. What sort of conversations did you and Dallas have initially about the kind of Jesus that you wanted to show? Because your Jesus it's a very different portrayal than Jim Caviezel's Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, or Willem Dafoe's in The Last Temptation of Christ, or you know what else is a good one, but also very different than yours is Max von Sydow.
Oh, yeah.
The greatest story ever told.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those Jesuses or Jesi, I don't know what they're.
Right from the start, Roumie's presence was calm, yet commanding. The topic was faith in an increasingly secular world, a world that, as Roumie puts it, has tried to banish God from visible culture. The host, though respectful, was skeptical. But that skepticism wouldn't last long.
In some ways, contemporary feeling Jesus?
I think what makes it feel like that we have, that all of those other portrayals didn't have access to, was the format of time in long-form storytelling to build characters and build relationships over episodes. You're seeing the nuances of his character, his quirks, the things that nobody's ever taken the time to explore are the humanity of these characters, the day-to-day of these characters. And so if you believe they existed, and I do, they were human beings.
Now, before we get into the most intense part of his debate with David Mackenzie, let's quickly show you Roumie's confrontation with Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, is not the type of person any Christian should want to get into a biblical argument with, unless they're super prepared.
Some people would feel like that's a pretty heavy role. I mean, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Basis of the world's largest religion.
Yeah.
God himself, according to Christians. Did you ever feel that on you? Like, that's a lot.
In the first season, I did. There was this moment, especially, which I've kind of talked about at times, where, and I think it still sort of affects me. I actually like telling the story because it's a reminder for me to remember what it's all about and who I'm serving as I endeavor to.
Hollywood has always had a complicated relationship with faith. It mocks it, waters it down, or ignores it altogether. And when someone dares to bring Christ into the conversation, the pushback is immediate. But watch how Jonathan Roumie stands his ground. shutting down every attempt atheist people use to reduce Jesus to just another historical figure.
So we were about midway through the first season, and the time came for me as Jesus to start preaching, full-on sermons. And we started filming. And then as I was going through these words, I suddenly, it's like I kind of felt I was outside of myself, listening to myself preach to a crowd outside the doors of in our story, Zebedee, James and John's father, Zebedee's house. And there was a crowd of people that was a growing crowd of onlookers, and our wonderful background actors that participate in the show, and many of whom have participated for years.
When asked if he ever felt the weight of playing Jesus, his response was raw and honest. He recalled a moment during the first season when he was preaching a full sermon, speaking words straight from Scripture. The host on set was hanging on to every word, his attention fully locked in. And suddenly, it hit him. He felt completely unworthy. The realization that he was uttering words spoken by God himself was overwhelming, almost too much to bear.
And try to mesmerize and galvanize the people that are listening to me and get their attention. And they seemed really attentive, so much so that it made me really self-aware.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I saying? What are these words? Like, these are holy, holy words said by the holiest being that ever walked the face of the earth. I shouldn't be doing this. This feels wrong. And so I would have those feelings, and then we would stop and then move on to the next setup and put the camera in a different place. And then as it went on, I just had to stop the production.
And here's where the moment becomes even more powerful. Instead of brushing off his emotions and powering through like a Hollywood actor would, he stopped everything. He pulled the director, Dallas Jenkins, aside and admitted that he didn't feel worthy to speak these words. That right there? That is the complete opposite of the ego-driven Hollywood machine.
Talked to the director, to Dallas Jenkins, and I said, "Can we just slow down a second?" And he said, "What's going on?" And so I took him aside. I said, "Listen, man, I'm having a hard time right now. Like, I was starting to feel panicked and overwhelmed, almost like I've only had one panic attack in my life, and it started to feel like it was creeping into that, and I didn't know why or how. Well, I kind of knew. I thought I knew why, and what was going on. But I just said, hey, "Can we slow it down?" And he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'm saying these words,
Most actors in Hollywood wouldn't hesitate to rewrite, mock, or twist the words of Jesus to fit their own agenda. But here was Jonathan Roumie, a man given the opportunity to play Christ in one of the most successful faith-based series of all time. And instead of elevating himself, he humbled himself.
Hearing myself say them, I don't feel worthy to be saying them. This is why I tell this story, because it drives home the point of the gift that I've been given in playing this role.
And what did Dallas Jenkins say in response? He put a hand on Jonathan's shoulder and told him something that silenced every doubt. None of us are truly worthy, but here we are. That moment was a turning point. Instead of questioning why he was chosen, Jonathan embraced the reality that this was God's plan, not his own.
And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, "Brother, none of us are truly worthy. But here we are. I mean, it's you and me. Here we are. We're doing this so that the world may know his story. Those who haven't heard his story may know the impact that he's had on the world and on our..."
Let that sink in. In an industry where people chase roles for power, money, and recognition, here was Jonathan Roumie realizing that the biggest role of his life wasn't something he earned. It was something he was called to do. And this is precisely why his performance is so different from Hollywood's empty attempts to portray Jesus. This isn't about fame. This isn't about personal glory. This is about telling the story of Christ in a way that wakes people up.
that was the essence. And it settled my spirit. And I thought, he's right. He's right. For whatever reason, God saw fit to put me in that role and not somebody else. Nobody else auditioned. There weren't auditions for the role. He had just called me up and said, "Do you want to do this again?" And I said, "Yes, of course." I didn't hesitate. But then when we got to that moment, it started to dawn on me the weight of what it was that I was being given to do.
Hollywood, of course, has its own way of portraying Jesus. It likes to turn him into just another teacher, a wise man, a revolutionary, but never God in the flesh. It strips away the miracles, downplays his divinity, and tries to fit him into modern narratives that have nothing to do with what he actually preached. But Jonathan Roumie refuses to play that game.
And would then inform the encounters and the experiences that I would have.
Roumie's personal faith journey is another testament to why he's so unshaken in the face of Hollywood skepticism. He wasn't just some actor who stumbled into this role and decided to adopt Christianity as a branding strategy. He was raised in the faith, baptized Greek Orthodox, later confirmed as a Catholic, and has spent years diving deeper into his beliefs rather than running from them.
And so I made my first communion and my confirmation as a Catholic, and probably when I got into my early 20s, I was revisiting the idea of my Orthodox roots as cousins and family members were getting married in the Orthodox Church, and I so admired the beauty and the sanctity with which they approach the liturgy, which is quite different than Catholicism for the most part. I mean, there's Eastern Catholic rites which are more similar to Greek Orthodox, but it was different. But it didn't draw me to go back completely.
And this is another point where Roumie stands in direct contrast to atheist Hollywood. In an industry where actors are constantly reinventing themselves to stay relevant, where they abandon their values for the next big opportunity, Roumie has done the opposite. Instead of distancing himself from his faith to make himself more marketable, he's leaned further into it. He has openly embraced prayer, the sacraments, and the deep history of the church, something Hollywood finds downright uncomfortable with.
I think I just felt like, no, this feels like the truth as I understand it in God's eyes. This seems true. And it's the church that Christ himself ultimately started. And for the reasons God knows, and despite every effort to thwart it, especially the largest empire in the world at the time, despite the Roman Empire's attempts to stamp it out.
Through murder.
Yeah, it didn't happen. It's still going.
When asked if playing Jesus has changed him, his answer wasn't just yes. It was that it forced him to pray and meditate before every season, to spend more time in God's presence, to engage in faith-based challenges that deepened his relationship with Christ. That is something no Hollywood actor would say. Most actors will tell you that a role changes them, but what they usually mean is that they have to do deep psychological work to understand the character. But Jonathan Roumie isn't just understanding Jesus from a distance. He's encountering him. And that's the difference. Hollywood doesn't get it because Hollywood doesn't believe in transformation through faith. It believes in self-reinvention, in shaping your own destiny, in chasing whatever new ideology will make you more popular. But Jonathan Roumie has made it clear. He isn't shaping Jesus to fit the times. He is allowing Jesus to shape him.
And that means something to me. And so doing this show, playing the character of Jesus, working with the Hallow app, doing all these prayer and meditation challenges with them, learning more about other stories of faith, other people of faith through like the challenges that we have coming up for Lent here. I've grown deeper in my faith. It's drawn me closer to the church, to want to know more about the aspects of the church that I didn't necessarily grow up learning.
And let's not forget the sheer audacity of The Chosen even existing in today's world. A faith-based show that doesn't water down the gospel, that refuses to modernize Jesus into some vague spiritual guru, that actually presents Christ as the Son of God. That alone is enough to make Hollywood squirm. And yet, it's one of the most successful crowd-funded shows in history. Why? Because people are hungry for the truth. They are sick of the same recycled Hollywood narratives that leave them empty. They are tired of the faith being mocked, twisted, or ignored altogether.
Whatever the day was where you went to catechism,
CCD
after school. And, I didn't learn any of the things that I've learned in the last several years because that's just not designed that way. And the church has such a rich history and tradition. It's so vast. It's such a storehouse. There's so much to know and to learn. And through the experiences of playing Christ and getting to force myself to go into prayer and meditation prior to every season.
And that's something Hollywood can't stand. They don't understand why this show has captivated millions. They don't understand why people are choosing to engage with faith rather than run from it. They don't understand why Jonathan Roumie, an actor who could have used this role to launch himself into mainstream stardom, is instead using it to glorify Christ. But we know why. It's because God is still moving, still speaking, and still calling people to himself. Jonathan Roumie isn't just another actor. He's living proof that when you surrender to Christ, he will use you in ways you never imagined. So let Hollywood roll its eyes. Let the skeptics dismiss him. Let the industry keep pushing its sanitized, secularized versions of Jesus. It won't change the fact that The Chosen is breaking records, changing lives, and proving that the gospel is more powerful than anything Hollywood can manufacture.
Through these periodical prayer challenges, like we just did one in Advent for Halloween, and now we're doing the Pray 40, which starts today, Ash Wednesday. It's forced me to just spend more time.
Jonathan Roumie didn't just step into a role. He stepped into a calling. And no amount of Hollywood skepticism is going to change that. Yet his confrontation with Tucker Carlson cannot be compared to how he shut down woke Christian mentality on The View.
I'm Jonathan Roumie.
Hi, guys. Wow.
I feel like I should bless myself. I feel like doing this.
I've got some water here.
He's got
I
some
can
water.
help the water if you want. I got some water right
We were just saying, at least you're not a blonde, blue-eyed Jesus, finally.
Yeah, I think we've gone a little more authentic to who Jesus might have actually been.
Jewish.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a simple interview, a casual conversation about The Chosen. But what the host didn't anticipate was Roumie turning the discussion into an absolute masterclass in faith. A moment so profound it left even their atheist minds reeling.
Yeah. So the show, The Chosen, is a historical drama based on the life of Jesus. The first 3 seasons had more than 600 million views. Yeah. And was the most crowd-funded TV series ever. Clearly, you're reaching people.
Yeah.
You play Jesus.
You?
So are you finding that people are having a little bit of trouble separating you from the part?
Watch out, because they weren't expecting the kind of responses he came with.
Take them off of those pedestals and make them relatable, real-life people with marital problems, with, issues of childbirth and the things that we go through today, the issues that we go through today. So by seeing essentially ourselves in these characters, like any great TV show, you start to identify. And then the fact that it's this story, that it's the greatest story ever told, now brings it to a whole other level. And they're like, oh, I can relate to Jesus in a way that I never thought I could before.
It really
Roumie understood the precarious position he was being put in the moment one of them leaned in, clearly eager to challenge Roumie on religion's role in modern society.
One of our crew, Zach, came to me months ago and said, I'm Catholic. You got to watch this show about Jesus. I was like, I know a lot about Jesus, and I don't, obviously.
I think there's always more to learn.
There's always more to learn, and what that's, you're so profound. I think what was fascinating to me is growing up, I always saw the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, right? And now I go to a Black Catholic church, and Jesus is brown. And I think it seems that you took such great pains to do that in this, and to portray him as he probably likely was, since this was the Middle East, right? Most people.
Sunny's ignorance was exposed so brutally, she had to admit there's a lot more she didn't know. And then, just when it seemed like the conversation couldn't get any more powerful, Roumie shared a private part of his life he doesn't really like talking about.
The housing market collapsing in 2008. I had booked a few other jobs. I started booking television, and I thought, okay, well, this is an opportunity to see if I can actually make this work. So I moved to LA, and for 8 years, I didn't have the safety of the job that I left in New York. It's a different unions and all sorts of complications to do the same thing in LA, but that's not what I was going to LA for. So I had to do all these other jobs, these side jobs. I drove rideshare, I worked in catering, all these things that I'd never done before, and gotten to the point where I was broke, I was out of money, I was out of food, I was out of even government assistance.
You could see that the hosts, some of whom started off skeptical, were visibly moved. Roumie wasn't just talking about faith, he was proving it.
And the only thing I hadn't done at that point was the thing that was left to do, which was to get on my knees and surrender my entire life and my career and everything that I had up to that point over to God, because there wasn't anything I realized I could do on my own.
Were you a believer before that?
Yeah, I was raised with the faith from a child, but it really wasn't until after that moment, it was about almost 6 years ago now, where I just said, Jesus, I surrender myself to you, take care of everything. And that day, I received this incomprehensible financial miracle that changed my life. And then 3 months.
They had started off the session thinking this was going to be another one of those segments where faith was subtly mocked, where belief was dismissed as wishful thinking. But how wrong they were. Yet, Roumie's responses to the ladies of the View pales in comparison to his face-off with Raymond Arroyo of EWTN News.
To be able to book a job, but I wanted to have a firm technique that I could survive on. And so I trained in Eric Morris's system. And he was, basically a guy that combined a number of different method-based systems together to create like one of the most comprehensive acting systems anybody could ever study, which I use still to this day.
You still use that to prepare for the, how did you apply that to this role? I mean, the challenge is, you don't have the raw stuff that other, you can base it on somebody, you can build a role on a historic figure.
I can't watch video exactly.
No, there's no YouTube of Jesus.
There's no YouTube of Jesus.
In a time where faith is increasingly questioned, Jonathan Roumie stands as an undeniable force, a man whose conviction and humility make disbelief seem almost irrational.
Now, I'm chosen, but before there was.
For me, it kind of stems back to the challenges of playing Jesus to begin with. Like, well, how do you do that? Robert Powell once in an interview said, to try to tackle the character of Jesus, I mean, he's unplayable.
And when he made the next statement, it totally put off the atheist interviewer.
He's impossible to play. So none of us know what it's like to be divine. We do know what it's like to be human. So the thing that I do is to bring the utmost of my humanity to the role as Jesus, and then let the Lord and the Holy Spirit sort out the divinity aspects of it.
I bring as much humanity as I can, he says. The divinity? I leave that to the Holy Spirit. Those words alone are a direct affront to skeptics. Atheists argue that Jesus was just a man, another teacher. Roumie's response is that Jesus was fully human, but also fully God. And his portrayal reflects both.
Series and possibly of my career is wrapping my head around how to communicate what actually happened at the Last Supper in a way that people feel that, as opposed to merely just hearing the words in Scripture, but feel what it is that he meant, and not knowing what exactly that looked like. So the only option I have, whether it's that or it's in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's sweating drops like blood or blood, depending on the translation you read, what generated that? What did that feel like? I have no idea. So I have to surrender that.
At that moment, it was clear atheism offers doubt, but faith offers proof through transformation. And Jonathan Roumie remains a living proof that Jesus is still at work.
You have to direct my steps in these scenes because they're beyond my comprehension. They're beyond my ability to infer what you were feeling. Like, Lord only knows. But I'm here, I'm open, I'm a vessel. Use me the way you want people to.
What do you think about Roumie's responses to these atheist interviewers? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.